So we are now just 48 hours out from the NFL draft, an NFL draft that Alex and I were just talking about the fact that it snuck up on all of us because, well, we waited until 48 hours before to record an episode, but we are here. Welcome back, everyone, to the Payne and Drain Show, a draft preview for the Detroit Lions for you here today. My name is Zach Payne. I'm one half of this show. I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, Alex Drain. Alex, how are we feeling on draft week?
It's a nice distraction, I think. Sunday was the start of, or I guess Saturday technically, but Sunday was the first Detroit Piston playoff game. Didn't go very well, despite being the number one seed. We'll see if they can bounce back tomorrow night. So, it's been a needed little break the last couple of days, looking over all these prospects and stuff. So. We'll see how this week goes, but if nothing else, we got something else to talk about.
Exactly. So obviously, draft season, the biggest milestone or biggest, most important date of the NFL offseason. And for the Lions, this is an especially important draft because coming off a down year, there is added importance to return to the playoffs, return to division contender status, try to compete for the NFC North next year. But as well, the Lions picking a little bit higher than they have the last couple of drafts. They have the 17th overall pick in the first round as of now. Obviously, that is subject to change if they want to trade out of that spot, but there's a little bit added pressure to address some of their needs, maybe get someone who can be a little bit more impactful. But this is a weird draft in the sense that the Lions roster is mostly really solid, and they have a chance if they can hit on a couple of these picks to not only return to the playoffs, but return to legit championship aspiration status.
Yeah, it's they're pretty well set up at most places, but then you have those couple of spots, and so the most comparable uh, year to this was that 24 draft where they were pretty short at corner, and then they ended up taking two corners right off the bat. So we've generally seen them go best player available, quote unquote, but using that template, I do think they'll probably address the two glaring needs. And then after that, pretty good spot. Like you've used free agency to kind of um, solidify a lot of the spots, plug a lot of holes, and you have for the most part pretty satisfactory starters and pretty respectable depth at most other places. So there's a lot of focus on those top two rounds. And I think I saw, I think it was Pride of Detroit rounded up all these mock drafts. I think there were 72 in the sample, and 70 of them had an offensive tackle first for the Lions. And then there were 11 of the 72 had a second round listed. And I think it was all 11 or 10 of 11 had an edge in the second round. So there is a broad consensus about what they're going to do, and I think it's probably more likely than not that they follow that.
Well, and I'm certainly partial to that too. I've done a couple of mock drafts this week on my channel, and both of those had tackle first round, edge second round, right? Like because it, the thing is, those are the two biggest needs. There's no debate about it. The Lions need specifically a pass rusher opposite Aiden Hutchinson, and they need a tackle because Larry Borum, even if he starts like week one, you need someone that can give you higher upside at the tackle position. And something that we've talked about before, tackles drafted outside of day one aren't really known for being good in any capacity. So it makes sense that people are penciling in tackle in the first round because that's where good tackles go. It's going to be very difficult to get a starting level tackle outside of that. And then, if they don't take an edge at 50, okay, that's fine. But you got to get some sort of situational pass rush help in some capacity in this draft. But that does go against what the Lions are known for in drafting best player available and against what Brad Holmes says. Now, Brad Holmes notably said the same thing before that aforementioned 24 draft, and he ended up taking Terrion and trading up for Terrion and then taking Rakestraw, and he played the whole, oh, that's just the way our board fell. Is there any part of you that's maybe concerned that they will avoid taking a tackle or addressing these needs?
Um, it's interesting because I've seen some of the discussion from about Larry Borum and saying like, "Oh, he could actually be the starter." Like, look at these PFF grades, like that kind of thing. But what makes me fight back against that impulse is the fact that they really prioritize offensive line in general. That that's something they pay a lot of attention to. They spend a lot on it. They believe it's the lifeblood of their team. I'm more concerned about them neglecting edge for reasons we've talked about before. It's just not a position that they've prioritized highly. They use the highest pick that hopefully the regime will ever have, um, unless they trade for a pick in the future and it ends up first overall. That'd be fine with me. But they they use their lone top five pick on an edge in Aiden Hutchinson, and after that, not a lot else. They used Josh Pascal that same draft. He is now gone. And then 2023 through 2025, that's three drafts. They picked, I don't remember, it's like 21 sometimes in those three drafts. They selected one edge, which was Ahmad Hassanin last year. That's in the sixth round. At that point, I mean, I guess, but it's not substantial. And it's not like in that period the Lions were in a position where oh, we've got Ziggy Ansah and Aiden Hutchinson together. Like we're good. This was a consistent need, and it didn't really get addressed in past years. I mean, we went into last year's draft saying edge could be a need, and they didn't really do anything with it. So, and it's been 2 years of going to the trade deadline, feeling like it's an area of need. So it's been a bit of a pattern that it hasn't been prioritized very highly by this front office. So that does concern me a little bit. But I think it's at a point where it's so dire that it probably can't be ignored again.
Well, if there's a will, there's a way for Brad Holmes to find a way to tell you that DJ Wanham is going to start at edge for 17 weeks, but we'll just have to wait and see. Or maybe Peyton Turner's going to be edge 3 this year, and everyone's going to surely be super calm and chill about that. So, just before we get into some of the more specifics, the Lions picks this year. 17th overall in the first round, 50th overall in the second. They don't have a third round pick after trading two future thirds for Isaac Tesla last year, but I have a feeling with the number of day three picks, they might still end up in that range regardless. So 118 and 128 in the fourth round, 128 coming from the Texans in the David Montgomery trade, 157 and 181 in the fifth round. 181 is a comp pick. 205, 213 in the sixth round, and then 222 in the seventh round. So healthy volume of picks, very concentrated on day three. Like I said, I would not be shocked to see the Lions trade another future third, as well as maybe one of those fourths to move up into the third round for someone they like. But they've got ammo to reinforce the depth here, which is honestly mostly what they need outside of a couple of needs.
Yeah, I mean, we've suspected that there would be a trade up from 118 into the third round. That is a bit of a jump. I think the third round ends like around 100, maybe. I don't
Yeah.
remember the exact
Like
because you get
with the
those.
comp
There's a
picks, I think
couple,
it's
yeah,
like
the comp
101,
picks.
102 or something.
Yeah, so it would be a bit of a jump, but if you trade, and we'll get into this, but if you trade down from 17 or you trade down from 50, then you pick up picks that then you can package to move up. And there's always going to be trading all around. It happens every year, especially from Holmes. One thing I do want to get on the record is that it's as you said, it's not impossible for a tackle outside of the first round to be good. I mean, like David Bakhtiari, um, he was like a mid rounder if I remember correctly. Jordan Mailata was like, of course, the ultimate project, but on the whole yes, it's generally the first round picks. Yeah, I would say that's probably the chalkiest position in the sport in terms of the rate of first rounders becoming the all pro guys. 2025 all pro team had Garrett Bowles, Penei Sewell, Darnell Wright, and Trent Williams as the first team tackles. All four are first round picks. And you go back further into your Rashawn Slaters and Tristan Wirfs, and I'm just trying to think of Lane Johnson, obviously. I mean, it is just such a high rate of the first rounders turning into the true stars. And even with the Lions, where you look at Penei Sewell and then Taylor Decker, and Taylor Decker was not like a high first, but he was a mid first, very similar spot to where the Lions are picking this year. So if you don't go with the first round tackle, it's not impossible, but it is a little risky for sure. To think that a second, third round tackle. I mean, frankly, you don't really see tackles taken in those spots. Period. Like that's just not a position you see a lot of second round picks be used on. So and this is a year with so many first round tackle prospects that I think it just makes the most sense to go that direction.
Well, and that's what I was going to bring up next is there's probably six tackles that are going to go in the first round, maybe seven that are like legit like first round caliber. So the Lions are going to be a good position. I know that there is maybe some wariness about when you have to draft for need. Like teams might be eyeing the Lions and be like, okay, if we want to tackle, we're going to have to jump the Lions and trade up to 16 or 15, whatever it may be. But there's so many that the Lions could go. I know that they've been linked to Caden Proctor a lot in the last week and a bit here. Blake Miller is another guy that a lot of the local media has eyed as like, hey, that's a Lions type of guy. But there again, like maybe a Monroe Freeling slips a little bit, maybe a Spencer Fano slips a little bit. Maybe the Lions trade up for one of the top tackles in the league or in this draft. Who knows? They should be able to get, if they want one, they should be able to get one. The only risk is let's say four tackles go in the top 16 and you're left in a position where it's like, okay, now we have to choose between trading down and hoping another guy falls to us, taking a tackle and reaching a little bit, or taking best player available and neglecting the position altogether. So it's going to take Holmes navigating the draft with some savvy, but that is something we've seen him do before. So, with that being said, with 17, where are you in terms of like wanting to like obviously you have to wait to see how the board falls, but with where the Lions are resource wise, how are you feeling about like trade up, stand pat, trade down at that spot?
So I think it really comes down to, first of all, what position you're taking. If we're taking a tackle, and let's just go with that assumption, because that's going to be the general feeling. I think it comes down to how many tackles are on the board at 17 and how you value them. And I will say I'm not the most and I'm not the best scout of offensive line talent in the world, like the most savvy about that kind of thing. I can watch tape at the college level or the pro level and tell you who is a good college tackle, right. Like I can watch that and say, oh, this guy's getting beat, this guy isn't getting beat, and to some degree, what the strengths and weaknesses are. Right. If there's if I see a tackle falling over repeatedly, or just getting like dipped under and blown around, right? Like I can be like, oh, the feet are slow or whatever, that kind of thing. But for the most part, guys that are being taken in the first round are all good college tackles. And so then it comes down to stuff like, ankle flexion and knee bend and arm length and how you value all that stuff. And I'm not advanced enough to have a great take on it. So for me, it's just kind of like, was this guy good in college? And most of these guys were. Sometimes you get a tackle where it's like, was he even that good in college? Like, where it's more developmental. I mean, I remember feeling that way about Fashion New a couple years ago, where I felt like the hype didn't necessarily match his production in college. So I'm not someone who has a big take on these six or seven names we're going to talk about, like in terms of this one's clearly better than another. Like I have an order in my mind, but for me, they're all kind of similar-ish levels. And if that's the case, then a trade down makes more sense. Because if you get to 17, and let's say there's only one or two tackles off the board, then there's four. If you think those four are all in a similar tier, then trading down to 23, 24 makes a lot of sense, in my opinion. However, if you get to 17 and there's one you think is way better, or you think that three of them just aren't any good, and only one that you think is good is remaining, then you probably should take him. And on the flip side, to that, if you believe that, say, Spencer Fano is a lot better than the others, and he happens to be there at 12 or 13, then a trade up is very attractive. And I do like him a lot, and I think it would be pretty enticing. But at the same time, as someone who does like a Caden Proctor or a Miller, it's also attractive to trade down and feel like I could get him at 25 and pick up some more bullets in the chamber for a later trade up. Like I think it can go either way. And we don't really know unless we see the Lions big board. And we also don't know until we see how the draft plays out. Because if there's a run on tackles, then all of a sudden a trade up becomes attractive too. Like it can go any which way. And I'm not sure how it will go. The only thing I know is that recently it seems like the mock drafts have more tackles falling as opposed to a run in the top 15 or so.
Yeah, so again, it's kind of hard to project a couple days out. Like until we see what is going on, it's hard to be like, oh, the Lions should trade down, trade up, do whatever. But the other interesting conversation regarding positional flexibility is a good number of these guys are right tackles. And Larry Borum, who we talked about earlier, is a right tackle, which has prompted a lot of conversation about moving Penei Sewell over to left. Is that do you have any like wariness with that, like preferring to draft a left tackle and keeping Sewell on the right, moving Sewell to the left to get and drafting a solid right tackle? Like, do you have any reservations about that conversation, or are you comfortable with Sewell playing either side?
I'm comfortable with it simply because you go back to when he was at Oregon. He was a
Yeah.
left tackle in college, and he was one of the best left tackles in college. He's regarded as a great athlete. He's not a guy that I look at it and think, oh, this only has to be a right tackle. I think and I'm not a person who also believes that you have to put your best lineman at left tackle. I've seen some of that discussion. Like Sewell at right tackle is perfectly fine, but he also seems versatile enough that he could move over, and I would be fine with that too.
Yeah, people forget that Penei Sewell's first NFL game was a start at left tackle against Nick Bosa because Taylor Decker like broke his thumb the like 3 days before the game. So they spent the whole summer cross training Sewell to be the right tackle, and then 2 days or 3 days before the game, Decker breaks a finger, and they're like, "Okay, I guess you're starting a left tackle. Good luck, kid." And so he's capable of doing it, but it is just an interesting conversation because he is an all-pro right tackle, and if there's some risk of him maybe having a little bit less of an effect at left tackle, I don't know. But Penei Sewell is one of the best tackles in the league, so that's why there's some wariness over, hey, like this is working. Why, like at an exceptional level, why would we want to mess with that? But that brings us into some of these tackle prospects. So I'm looking at Dane Brugler's The Beast Guide at the Athletic right now, which is probably the most comprehensive draft guide out there. Spencer Fano is listed as his OT1, and again, like there's a number of guys in the first round, but in terms of like the top end of what you can get out of this class, do you agree with that? Like, is Fano at the top of your board, or do you have someone else up there?
No, I like him the most. He's only 21 and a half, but 3 year starter at Utah. He was like, we're now into that range where there are guys that the draft is a lot of guys that I remember as recruits coming out of high school. And Michigan was really in on both Spencer Fano and Caleb Lumu in this class, and they ended up both going to Utah as kind of a package deal. But I mean, Fano was a big time recruit, so he's a guy with that pedigree where he's just been at the top of his class since high school, then into college, and his production at Utah was elite. Really, really good stuff. Won the Outland Trophy this year in the college level. 9.8 on the RAS score, which we talk about. So all the athletic tools. Plays mean, was a team captain, and he played some left tackle too, I believe, in his first year. And then when Lomu entered the starting lineup, he moved over to the right side. Um, Consistently healthy, like it basically checks every box. And if you traded up to get him, which is my assumption of what would have to happen, the one thing I heard with him today, I think I was reading an article and someone was saying that his arm length might cause him to fall a little bit, or that's the concern there. Um,
Just like getting over leveraged, like what, like leaning too much
yeah, just
to
short arms. Like there's a certain kind of OL coach and scout that just really prioritizes length at tackle because then you can kind of reach down and grab. Like it gives you have more of a radius, right? It's like a catch
yeah.
radius with a wide receiver. You're just catching the rusher. Um, so if he does fall a little bit, again, the possibility of a trade up's really attractive to me because with his age and the fact that Penei Sewell's played, 5 years in the NFL and he's still only 17, it allows you to have uh, a tackle combo locked in for
A
like 10
decade.
years. Yeah, you don't have to worry about it, and Polynesian Brotherhood, the whole thing. So I really 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 like Fano, and again, if he got to that 12 or 13 range, it would be enticing for sure to trade up.
Now, the arm length thing is funny because once upon a time, that was the whole thing with Aiden Hutchinson too. And I remember Aaron Glenn at the time had the conversation, like he was talking to the media, and he looked at them and he said, "You're talking about that, like that's the difference." And for those who are just listening, I'm just holding up like 2 inches, like
Yeah.
with my fingers, like. Aaron Glenn was like, "You're talking about like if that is the difference between you being good and not good, then there's other problems at play." When it comes to tackles, do you still subscribe to that kind of idea, or like is this just a hey, any problems with that you trust Hank Fraley to sort it out?
Yeah, again, I'm not nuanced enough with OL like technique and stuff. I just look for production and traits, and Fano's got all of that for me.
And the Lions we know love production and trait like they like their traits as well, but production and pedigree they put a lot of value on and that kind of team captain stuff as well. Next up on the board, now I'm gonna butcher this name, but Francis Mayoga, how do you pronounce that one?
Let me get a pronunciation guide pulled up
The
here.
tackle from Miami that now he has been frequently mocked as the best tackle in the league by a lot of different sources. So, or in the draft rather. So this is another guy I doubt the Lions are going to have a chance at anyways. He probably goes in the top 10, but how do we feel about him? However you pronounce his name.
It looks like Moe. Ooh, sounds. I don't know.
Because
Hmm.
like I'm thinking of like Maui, like I want to say like Maui Goa, but I feel like that's way wrong.
Yeah, I'll keep looking here. There's a few pronunciations. Anyway, guy that him and Fano were kind of together. They were both 5 stars. They were both 3 year starters. The difference, I think, here is only a star in his final year, and that's when he became an All-American. And there's a lot of guys from this Miami team that made the national title game in this draft, and they all have sort of a similar thing of, boomed as in their final year in college situation. Um, I like him quite a bit. I just think that Fano's been more consistent. And I did see some debate about maybe more of a right tackle or possibly even a guard with him. So that's the part that I know just has me rate him a little bit lower. But other people seem to really like him. If the Lions somehow took him, then he'd probably be fine. Like I haven't seen as much of him or followed him as much, but um, he played well enough as a junior that I don't have a ton of reservations, I guess.
Yeah, so moving along here, I'm gonna save two of these guys that we'll talk about because they've been the most frequently talked about with the Lions. But next up, the combination of Lomo, who you briefly touched on earlier, and Monroe Freeling, the tackle from Georgia. More of these guys that have the upside, but probably need a little bit more refinement with their play. And that is again where it's like, hey, Hank Fraley, this is where you got to take care of business. But also, this might be two of the other guys where it's like, hey, we might be talking about Larry Borum starting week 1 and then having a rookie take over like week 4 or 5 in the season, give them a little bit more time to season up.
This doesn't mean to say it's Goa, Maui Ngoa, something like that.
Well, if the Lions draft him, we'll have to figure out that
Yeah, we'll learn
pronunciation.
that one. But anyway, yeah, you were talking about Freeling, right?
Freeling and Lomo, like kind of
A
packaged
little more
together, like
together. Okay, so
yeah, like the young guys with upside.
yeah, so Freeling, this is a guy that I've seen more and more of the talk of this is the Lions kind of profile. I think it was Kay Adams might have tweeted that yesterday. Uh, a 1.5 year starter at Georgia, but still pretty young. 9.99 RAS, which has to be mentioned, like the ultimate athletic marvel. Um, More of a power guy, but can be out leveraged a little too upright, sort of thing. But pass pro first, and then the big thing is just played left tackle at Georgia, and obviously there is the um, synergy with Tate Ratledge. I saw a quote from Ratledge today saying that he's hoping that they pick Freeling. Maybe that plays a factor. And then Lomu played left tackle at Utah too. So these are your two kind of left tackle guys. Lomu seems to have slid a little bit. Where earlier in the draft process it seemed like he was mid first. Now I had him down at 27 on the. I looked at the consensus big board that Arif Hassan puts together, and I just wrote these numbers down. So that's a guy maybe you trade down for. With him, the production doesn't seem as great. Better in pass pro than on the ground. But again, really athletic, 9.77 RAS. Like just a little bit behind Freeling, but the traits are there, and maybe they do need a little bit of time to develop. But I think given how much they played in college, like if you're starting at Georgia, I feel like you're probably going to start in the NFL pretty quickly here. Um, so I don't have a major issue with either of these guys. They're fine to me.
Now, these next two guys are probably the two that are talked about with the Lions the most. Now, one of them is more national, one of them is more local. The most popular pick by far has been Caden Proctor, who is just an absolute behemoth of a human being that probably needs some some refinement with his technique, but in terms of just like size, athleticism, it's the old Saban quote like boxing has weight classes for a reason. You always want to be the biggest guy. Well, Caden Proctor is certainly the biggest guy, the biggest bully in the yard. So, in terms of like him, he's been mocked to the Lions 1,000 times. Like he's probably the most popular pick for the Lions at 17 in these mocks. The other guy is Blake Miller, who Colton Pouncey was the first that I saw that was like, that's a lion because he, like at the combine, attended Blake Miller's media availability, and he came away from that, and his instant reaction was, "Oh, that's a lion," because 4-year starter, has the wrestling background, has the probably fits the grit index with the he had a fractured wrist, I believe it was, and then missed one practice and was right back at it, right back on the horse. So these are two guys that. And I know Miller definitely fits some of the physical traits as well. More of a run blocker, has some problems anchoring in pass pro. Caden Proctor, like I said, the technique is far behind where he is size wise. But those are two guys that have been talked about a lot as like, oh, these are Lions type of guys, like Dan Campbell guys.
Yeah, I mean Proctor, I'm very familiar with. He started as a true freshman at Alabama in the 2023 season. Michigan played against him in the Rose Bowl that year, and he wasn't super developed at that point. Like he's improved a lot in that time. This past season, he became an All-American, I believe. I think I have that written down here. Yeah. So from his first year where he was, and again, a true freshman left tackle is usually not going to be that great, but he hung in there. He got beat in that Rose Bowl a decent bit by the Josiah Stewarts and Derek Moores and guys that Michigan had on that defense. But just the fact that he hung in there and battled really endeared me to him. And then he had a humorous little saga after his freshman year when Nick Saban retired. He then transferred home. He's from the Des Moines area. He transferred to Iowa in the winter portal after Saban retired. He spent, I guess, 2 to 3 months at Iowa and then decided it was not for him. He got back in the spring portal and returned to Alabama. So that's Iowa Hawkeyes legend. But it's notable just because the Lions have picked Sam Laporta, they've picked and then all the Alabama guys, right? And so you have that they've had some Iowa guys, they and Jack Campbell obviously. Then they've had a number of Alabama guys, and then he's sort of both. Uh, so all that's fun and games, but as you mentioned, just gigantic guy, 6'7", 350 to 360 was where his weight's been reported. Apparently, at one point it was up in 365, 370 range. I mean, that's
Like, good luck bull rushing that man.
Yeah, that's like Mike Onwenu of the Patriots, who was once a Michigan Wolverine, was, like just human planet sort of situation, but really athletic for his size. Like his speed times are only so good, but his other traits really nice. 8.79 RAS as a result. And I just like seeing his development. Like to go from 3-year starter, but to get better each year after year after year to where he is now. I like that. I mean, he sometimes plays a little tall, and you're going to have some issues moving in space and that kind of thing at that size, but he's played left tackle in college, so in theory he could stay there. And I really like Caden Proctor. I mean, I know that people have really fallen in love with Monroe Freeling, and you're a big Blake Miller guy, but I like Caden Proctor a lot. He would probably be my pick if Fano isn't there, but all of these are fine options. And as you mentioned with Miller, I wasn't as familiar with his game, but just reading about him, it all makes sense. I like that he's an Ohio guy that didn't go to Ohio State. And 4-year starter at Clemson. really athletic as well. All these guys grade out pretty well in their combine testing
I was
times.
gonna
Good.
say, like, I know that a lot of the like tackles are like relatively athletic for their position, but especially like nowadays. But it feels like the last like 2, 3 years, everyone is like a 9+ RAS for the most
Well,
part.
what's interesting is that of these six that I mentioned, I think Maui Ngoa is the worst of the six in his RAS scores, and he's still at 8.79 or something. So this is just a really athletic group. But as you mentioned, when you read through the profile of Blake Miller, definitely has all of the Lionsy sort of things with the injuries and playing through them, and team captain and leadership and on and on and on. Play strength, plays hard, all that stuff. Now he's probably a pure right tackle. So again, if you're worried about the Sewell thing, then you're probably going to lean towards Proctor and Lomu and Freeling. Whereas if you care now don't care as much, then Miller, I guess Fano, but he could be both sides, and then Maui and Goa as the other one. So that's something to factor in. But I would be perfectly fine with Blake Miller. He's down at 32 on the consensus big board. So if he's your guy, then I think a trade down makes the most sense.
Yeah, like
Whereas
17's pushing it a bit.
yeah, Freeling and Proctor, I think probably are fine at 17, whereas Lomu and Miller maybe a trade down precedes it. But again, it's the feel of the board, how it's developing, and ultimately, if Miller's your guy, do you want to risk it? Right? If he's the guy you want to take, 17 to 24, all it takes is one team to have him
Yep.
high on their board. So that's the consideration.
And let's be honest, Brad Holmes would absolutely like if Blake Miller's his guy, he would take Blake Miller at 17 and not lose a second sleep over it. Like the Lions are not afraid of reaching, quote unquote. We see them do it all the time. So that's not something that I'd be terribly worried about. I will say the thing with Proctor is you mentioned 6'7", like 360 pounds. Anytime the Lions are on the 1 yard line, I just give the ball to him at fullback.
Well, so he's actually had a number of plays where they've given him the ball, including a pass play last year. I think that was in the
Yeah.
Georgia game.
It's the old like the fridge William Perry or the Don Terry Poe. It's like we're just gonna put the biggest guy on the field in and stop him. I dare you.
Dan Skipper, but he's black and a lot more athletic now. Like,
And can hopefully be a better starter. You
yeah.
know what? I want Caden Proctor because I want the Caden Proctor to Penei Sewell pass play. Give me that touchdown. Give me that play. That'd be absolutely electric. But yeah, aside from that, are there any other tackles that you want to mention here for kind of first round consideration?
I mean, I've seen Max Iannacor, Iannacor. I'm not up on that one. He's sometimes in the first round. He's 36th on the consensus big board, so he's close enough to Blake Miller to probably be mentioned. He's an interesting story as a from Nigeria, came up through JUCO, then went to ASU. Two solid seasons as a starter and right tackle, but not like blow it out the roof production wise. Seems like quite possible he would have to sit a year maybe and refine his technique and things like that. But another guy that's very athletic and rangy and good footwork, all that stuff. Pretty durable, but just generally raw. And I am not really feeling that. Like if you draft him, I feel like he needs to be someone that can contribute this year. I just don't think you're in a place where you can take that kind of luxury pick with regards to their needs. So that's what I would say on him. And then after the first round, not a ton that I have to say about the tackle bucket. The one guy I would highlight is Caleb Tiernan. He's 67th on the consensus big board. If you were going to do an inverted first two rounds and go edge first and then tackle later, Tiernan's like the one guy that I do kind of like. He played both sides, right tackle and left tackle at Northwestern. 3.5 year starter in the Big Ten, played against a ton of great edge rushers and was consistently very good. Really smart guy, elite work ethic, like a lot of Lionsy traits. He's also a local guy from Country Day. Michigan was always very upset that he decided to leave the state and go to Northwestern. But I was always a fan of Caleb Tiernan, like a good player. It's not as fruitful outside the first round, but he's one guy I do like and wanted to sort of highlight.
Yeah, so that's the kind of crop of tackles to be on the lookout for at 17, or just in the first round in general. Like we said, probably the way the Lions are going to go, so that's why we spend so much time on it, but it's possible that they could go another way. And now, speaking of some other options at 17 or in the first round, if the Lions decide not to go with the tackle, who are some of the, I guess, standouts to you that if the Lions do truly just want to go best player available, that you think could make some sense?
Um, well, so do you want to get into edges now?
Sure, we could do edge. We could talk about actually let's just do edge because we could that could bleed into the 50th overall conversation. So yeah, let's just do edge. Who are some of the edges that stand out to you?
Well, it seems like for the first round pick, there's only a couple names because the general consensus seems to be that the trio of Arvell Reese, Bailey, and Payne will all be gone pretty long before 17. So not going to talk about them. The two names that get brought up a lot there are Keldrick Falk of Auburn and Akeem Mesidor of Miami. They're very close in place on the consensus big board. Falk is at 19, Mesidor is at 23, so right in that range. Falk, is one of those guys where we've talked about this before with production versus um, his
Trace.
actual, yeah. And this isn't to say there was no production. He did have 9 sacks in 2024, but then only 2 sacks this year. Now, sacks aren't everything, but the PFF grades went down a little bit in the pass rushing department in 2025. Run D grades have always been really good. And again, it's sort of the traits with his frame and a 9.1 RAS, the speed and size. Seems to have versatile enough pass rush moves and a vocal leader, captain, all that kind of stuff. But I saw one note in the Beast that scared me a little bit with him, which was needs to ratchet up intensity to reach NFL ceiling. And I read that and I was like, I don't know if that's a Lions guy.
That's
Like,
not a Lions guy. And look, the thing with Falk is like the traits and the age are super appealing. You're like, wow, you could get someone this with this much upside that young that gives you so much time for him to hit his ceiling. But when someone has those traits and isn't putting it together at the college level, that's a bit of a red flag.
yeah, so the other thing to mention with him is just his archetype. He's 6'6", 285, and he played mostly as a 3-4 defensive end, true down lineman. So that's kind of in this, like, what do you want him to do, right? Is he going to be a guy that plays some edge but also kicks inside and, your NASCAR packages and that kind of stuff? Like that's a very different, because we're going to talk about all these different edges, but there's a difference between a 6'2", 240 edge and a 6'6", 285 edge. Those are different positions, fundamentally speaking. So,
Yeah, and if Falk is going to be more of that 4-eye, 5 technique kind of
yeah.
guy, uh, this might be an overreaction. He kind of just seems like a more athletic Josh Pascal in terms of like what he would do in Detroit, where he'd be an early down run defender, and then we'd get to passing downs, and you just would like more.
Yeah, and so I just tend to be against those kinds of players. Like they're not my favorite. So I would probably prefer to pass on Falk. Akeem Mesidor is the other one. Canadian for you. Played he was a tackle at West Virginia, and then he moved to edge when he transferred to Miami. So some injury issues here. Had a foot issue that washed out his 2023 season. As a result, he's going to be a 25-year-old rookie. There was a quote by Holmes at one of his press conferences a couple weeks ago, whenever that was. They asked him about that, and he did say it's a factor because it has to be. I mean, when
Yeah.
you're getting to a second contract at 29 or 30, that's really different than a second contract at 25. So something to keep an eye on, but really blew up this
Counterpoint,
year.
quickly, counterpoint. Brad Holmes is also the guy who drafted Hendon Hooker. So age clearly isn't everything to him.
That is fair. Mesidor really blew up this year at the edge position. Not the biggest or heaviest guy, and he didn't really test at the combine, so I don't have a RAS on him, or at least one at the time I was writing this down. But seemed to be like a good edge setter. Plays really aggressively and high motor. Sometimes the aggression gets him upfield too much, all that kind of stuff. Like seems like a Lions ish guy, but at the same time, for me, just 25 with some knee and foot issues. Ah. I don't know. I think I'd stay away from that a little bit, but that's just me.
I do like Mesidor in terms of because compared to like the middle crop of edge rushers, he's probably the most plug and play pass rusher, and I think he would give the most pass rush help to the Lions. And for a team that's trying to win relatively now, he would be pretty impactful right out of the box. My thing with him is it seems like you mentioned he kind of just is flying around the field and he's a little bit more of that speed rusher. And that's not really what the Lions want. They kind of they like we know they prefer the more can crusher, like has a strong bull rush, goes speed to power and builds off of that. So in terms of that stylistic fit, I don't think he's necessarily what the Lions are looking for. However, I think he would be probably the most impactful of the guys that they would have available to them.
Yeah, I mean, certainly with the age comes the like win now sort of thing, right? The more plug and play factor. It's an
He's an
interesting
Eagle.
debate. Yeah, it's an interesting debate, I think, a little bit with what should the Lions prioritize? Like you just mentioned the power rusher sort of thing, and you talked about that on your one mock draft video I watched. I've always been more impartial to the speed rusher just because for me, we've had too many of the like the Pascal-esque power rushers that don't really have
Yeah,
that juice. And I just wish to have like we got a tiny glimpse of James Houston, and then that was it in terms of the speed rusher that could take advantage of that single matchup, right? And just sort of like dip around the edge and get to the quarterback. But I do see your argument in terms of if Hutch is flushing the quarterback, you want the guy to hold the pocket and contain the QB, especially as a defense that seems to still be a man coverage defense. You're always going to be vulnerable to the scramble. And if you have that world where you've got a speed rusher that's blowing that edge, then it just leads to a bunch of scrambling.
and I should be clear, like when I said that in the video, I don't disagree with you. Like I do love a good speed rusher. I love what the Broncos have done with like Nick Benito, like that type of edge rusher, and Jonathan Cooper. But it's more so this is what the Lions like. We know the
Yeah.
Lions prefer these power guys. Like for as much as I like if I would love Akeem Mesidor, I don't think the Lions would love him as much as you or I would. So that's kind of where my hesitation comes from. And that's where an interesting name pops up, like a couple of interesting names at the back end of the first round are TJ Parker and Zion Young, who aren't like TJ Parker. I know there was a big drop off in production this year. Zion Young isn't necessarily like he's probably more of that Josh Pascal type, but man, they just seem like Lions type of players.
Yeah, I mean, also, it should be noted, like I said this, I think on our last video, I wrote it in a piece I did, but I'm not opposed to two edges in this draft, like one,
Oh yeah.
earlier and one later. Like I would, in a perfect world, you would probably have a power rusher for your early downs, and then your Josiah Stewart, like smaller Tasmanian devil kind of guy to sub in on pass rushing packages. That would be perfect. But we've literally never had more than three functional edges on this team, and three is pushing it.
Yeah, like three at a time or three in
Yeah.
general, because they
No,
kind
three
of
at a
rotate.
time. Like we had like when Pascal and Kaminsky were still playing, and then like Houston sprinkled in, and then Hutchinson. Like that 22 season was probably
Even
the
then,
peak of that.
Pascal was still always hurt. So it was Kaminsky and then and then Kaminsky would kick into 4-eye or 3 tech on the
Yeah.
passing downs, and then Houston would fly off the edge. I would actually like someone in a similar archetype to like maybe like a Harold Perkins type of guy later in the draft, where it's someone who's not necessarily an edge rusher, but can maybe fill that Sam role, but be an alternative to Barnes, where Barnes is more of a run defender. You get some pass rush juice there, but someone who can also drop into coverage in a pinch. That might be the later round type of guy that you could fill just a super niche role. But I hear what you're saying. Doubling down on edge is also something I would not be opposed to because Wanham's only here for 1 year and there's no one else.
Yeah.
Like Hassanin, I guess. There's
Yeah.
eh.
So TJ Parker, I do like quite a bit. He was a 3-4 outside linebacker at Clemson. Really good freshman year, then had the huge sophomore season, as you mentioned. Production dipped a bit, but he still had 6 sacks and like 80 PFF grade. Like it wasn't he was a bum or anything. More tackles for loss than games played in his Clemson career. Speed to power guy, but the motor's always going. And the plus with him, obviously, is as a 3-4 OLB, he can drop into space, right, and can do those zone drops and that sort of thing a little bit more. High level RAS. The concern, I guess, is when the speed rush doesn't work, then does he have everything else in terms of his pass rush moves? Not sure, but a trade up to get TJ Parker, I'm not like opposed to. I liked him. I liked him quite a bit to be honest.
I had a mock draft that went out a couple hours ago at the time of recording this, and that I did trade up to 40 for Parker in that scenario where I was like, okay, like you get into the spot where it's like guys like Zion Young and Cassius Howell are starting to go, and it's like, okay, Parker probably could go ahead of them in real life. If that's the scenario where it's the same conversation as Fano in the first round at tackle, right? Like where if he gets like 12, 13, like maybe you jump up and get him. If TJ Parker gets to like 35, 40, I would not mind trading up for him. Um, a couple other names worth mentioning. Cassius Howell, who I briefly mentioned, Gabe Jackas, who is another one that's like kind of that can crusher. I'd also want to get your insight on a Michigan guy, Derek Moore, who, like, in terms of how he could potentially fit into this.
Yeah, so Derek Moore is, at least among some Michigan fans, a little bit of a like, I don't know that I've suggested this to some people and they're a little bit like, what? No. But part of it was just related to you can't view Derek Moore without mentioning his usage and the conditions he was playing in. He doesn't have like the most incredible counting stats, but it's because he was in this just insane rotation on the defensive line at Michigan, where they were rotating in bodies that made no sense. They were playing players that were not very good over players that were very good like him. So he spent like a ton of snaps on the sideline for no reason. And so when you view it in terms of that, the fact he still had 10 sacks, he actually grades out as the most efficient pass rusher in terms of pressure rate in the Big Ten and number 17 nationally. And I like him quite a bit. Like he's always had the good athletic frame. We don't have testing numbers. I think he was dinged up in the spring when that was going around, but he can play in the run defense. He can play as a physical edge setter, but he also has enough, I think, as a pass rusher. And he hasn't really been coached. He was coached his first 2 years, and then the last 2 years he had a defensive coordinator who was an NFL play caller that had no interest really in player development, and he had a head coach who was messaging women on
Oh,
Instagram rather than coaching. So I think there's like untapped upside a little bit with him. And that's despite being a 4 year player who was still a good player in a premier conference. So, and he's 60 on the composite big board. So, like, sticking at 50 and taking Derek Moore, I got no issue with. I would be totally fine with that. I think he's a good player, and I think there's more to get out of him than even we've seen so far. So, that is a name I like. Um, the Zion Young name you mentioned, he's an interesting guy because he started at Michigan State, and then he ended up at Mizzou. I didn't really follow his career after he left state, and then started looking at draft names a few months ago, and I saw that name, and I was like, "Is that the same Zion Young that was at Michigan State?" And then it turns out he is 260, 270 pound guy. Was a team captain at Mizzou. Pass rush improved in 2025. Athleticism not as good, 7.67 RAS. Four offsides flags in 2025. He was involved in the tunnel fight against Michigan in 22. He's had some legal situations going on with that. That's going to dispose me a little bit to not be too interested in him. But certainly from like his physical standpoint, he could make sense to the Lions. I know a lot of people have mocked, as you mentioned. His name, by the way, is pronounced Gabe Akis.
no.
The J is silent.
Oh well.
But 4 year starter at Illinois, um, freshman All American, and then just continued to get better. 12 sacks as a senior. I don't have an issue with him. Like he's fine. Um, Not necessarily one I'm like pounding down the door to get, but I wouldn't have a major issue with it. And again, another team captain, 50 straight games played in. So for all the people talking about Brad Holmes and injured players, doesn't apply here. I find him fine. And then the last guy I'd put in a word for is R. Mason Thomas. Now he's a little smaller and maybe more of a situational pass rusher rather than every down edge, but just a terror as a pass rusher. And a speed to power guy from Oklahoma, but can sort of forklift defenders, good hands. maybe not as great as a run defender, which is why I mentioned maybe more of a situational pass rusher. He's down at 240, so doubles are going to be a concern there. But if you were looking for someone in that mold of the speed rusher to pair on pass rush downs, that guy has as much pass rush juice as anybody that we've talked about here. So I have to put in a word for him.
Yeah, no, there are a number of other edge rushers that we didn't mention, like Dennis Sutton or Malachi Lawrence, like some of those types of guys. There are a lot of edge options for the Lions at 50. It's kind of similar to the tackle discussion at 17. Like, if you want a guy, you can get a guy. In terms of like getting outside of the tackle and edge conversation a little bit, I would be remiss if we didn't mention him because he's been linked to the Lions and he fits the Brad Holmes mold of major injury concerns, and that's corner Jermod McCoy, who missed the whole year with a torn ACL. And man, some of the conversation around his knee is so weird because I swear ACLs are not that big of a deal anymore, but suddenly this guy is like, it's going to ruin his whole career. Maybe there's talk of like rumors of a degenerative knee thing here. But when he was playing at 19 years old, he looked pretty darn good. And if you're of the mind that you don't like Terrion Arnold, or maybe you think his legal problems are a bigger deal, and you want another corner, that's another guy that could be, if he's healthy, being the asterisk as always, which we know Brad Holmes would love. He could be a guy, and he's been rumored to not be a first round pick because of the knee issue. So worth mentioning.
Yeah, I don't know too much about him, but I would probably stay away from injured guys at least early in the draft. If you want to do that a little later, I'd be more in favor of it. Another couple of names. There's been a little bit of talk about the guard from Penn State, Ione. I'm not sure
Oh yeah,
exactly how that is pronounced.
Olaiva Vega Ione. That you know what? That also fits the Lions mold of getting you remember the old on Johnson tweet? Like, I can't pronounce a damn name on this defense, like back in the day. Like when they had like Onwuzurike and like all these different guys. Like, yeah, like uh, so
Yeah.
fits that profile.
Yeah, I just am not big, and he's 13th on the composite big board. I'm just not a big guard in the first round guy, especially that high. Like you got to be like Quentin Nelson, I feel like, for me to.
I feel like I'm higher on Christian Mahogany than a lot of people seem to be.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
I know he had his problems coming back from injury last year. He was coming back from injury, and I mean nobody looks good for prolonged stretches on that O-line except for Sewell last year. So I'm willing to give Mahogany a pass with an actual center next to him.
Yeah, and like you don't just have him, you have Miles Frazier still. You
Yeah.
picked up Ben Barch. You picked up I mean Juice Scruggs should play center, not guard, but like in theory could play guard too. Like they have enough options that I'm just not that's not a position of need for me, and that goes the same for some of the second round guards. The one that I've seen that maybe you can nibble on if you don't take the first round tackle is Jennings Dunker from Iowa. He played tackle in college at right tackle, but people think he's maybe more of a guard in the NFL. That's one I could get behind a little bit, but as a whole, that's not a major position of need to me. Safety, I think, is worth discussing just because they didn't act in the free agent period like Kirby Joseph is dead, but some people think he is. So
They didn't not act like it though. Like the
well,
Lions
they
have a
got guys,
lot.
but they
They
didn't.
have a lot of safeties on the roster. Like
Right, right.
so I because look, you're not going to replace Kirby Joseph with a $1 million safety, but you can get a guy who can give you snaps for
You
a
can
million
replace
bucks
him in the
in
aggregate.
yeah, exactly. Like if you take enough guys that can play every position on defense, surely one of them will hit, right? Like between Izzian and Maddox and some of the other guys, like you could probably get a decent amount of like production. You just honestly, turnovers is the big thing. Like when we start looking at some of these like safeties, but also just the later round guys in general, I want athletes that can turn the ball over and hunt the football because that is the one area that Kirby has that ability. Like he's a ball hawk, one of the best in the league. No one else really has that ability on the defense right now.
Yeah, I mean, the one safety in the first round that seems to be talked about some is Dylan Thieneman, number 18 on the consensus big board. I remember him when he was at Purdue. They were playing this cover one defense where they'd line up their deep safety in the parking lot. He'd play like so far off this, like so deep he was
Well,
off the screen.
and speaking of Kirby, Kirby did that at Illinois too back in the day.
Yeah,
He used to
well,
line he lined up like 30 yards behind the line of scrimmage.
get ready for a mind blown warthog moment here. But Kirby Joseph's college DC was Dylan Thieneman's original college head coach. So it was the exact same defense they were playing in. Um,
Just saying.
but I like Thieneman stuff. It's just not the biggest area of need for me. But if you think Kirby is dead, then drafting Dylan Thieneman makes a lot of sense. And likewise, Bud Clark of TCU has been talked about a little bit as a
I've
third
seen that
round
one, yeah.
candidate. Yeah, he was a 4-year starter at TCU, which means he was on TCU's CFP team, which feels like it was 30 years ago, but that was still him. Ball hawking safety, 15 picks, 35 PBUs in his career, 889 RAS. Just like the ball skills to replace Kirby Joseph would make a lot of sense with him. And again, if he tackles some injury issues, wow, who does that sound like?
One day the
Uh,
Lions are going to draft someone that never gets hurt.
yeah.
But it won't be this year and it won't be with Brad Holmes.
I also saw some discussion of Emmanuel McNeil Warren falling into the second round. He's from Toledo. That's another kind of safety name. Uh, and when you talk about takeaways, he's the peanut punch guy in this draft. A lot of forced fumbles with him. Never transferred from Toledo, so like if you think that's a sign of loyalty or whatever, that's a plus, I guess.
Well, I mean, people want to give Jeremiah Smith all that credit for being like, I could have made $10 million, but I'm here for my legacy. Like, okay,
Yeah,
do what you want. I'm not going to fault people for chasing the bag. Like, go get your money. You don't know how long you're going to be playing.
I do think that this draft has a lot of depth at safety. I will say so. I maybe am not as high on drafting one early. There was a lot of guys that I remember and thought were decent later on. Kamari Ramsey from USC, Jalen Husky, who started at Bowling Green, ended up at Maryland. Louis Moore was on the Indiana national championship team. I was scrolling through the safety names, and like when I did a mock draft at one point, I was like, why are all the good remaining players safeties? Like it felt like there were a lot of safeties available, even in like the third, fourth, fifth rounds. So I would maybe push that one off a little bit. That's just my preference. Now, on the topic of sort of safety, we do have to talk about your guy and it seems like a lot of people's guy, which is Kyle
Kyle Lewis,
Lewis.
baby. This guy. Okay, so we talked about edge and tackle a lot, but one of the other needs that the Lions have is will linebacker or a coverage linebacker because right now Malcolm Rodriguez is your starting will. And I love Rodrigo, not a coverage guy. He's a decent run defender, but he's not a coverage guy. Kyle Lewis, if you need someone to cover out in the flat, if you need him to man up on a tight end or a running back, he is your guy. He's very undersized for a linebacker. Like he's kind of the Jeremiah Owusu Koromoa build, but he's undersized, but he's very athletic. Not necessarily like straight line speed, but his fluidity, his acceleration, and his ability to cover out in space is phenomenal. And the Lions are one of the few teams that have the 4-3 scheme where he actually would make sense at will linebacker. Like a lot of teams are running these hybrid 4-2-5s and these various nickel and dime sets where Lewis could maybe have to play nickel, maybe have to be more of like a box safety. In Detroit, he would fit kind of the position he was playing at Pittsburgh. So I like we talk about the Lions trading into the third round. That's the guy I would be trading up for in like the 70-ish range.
So how do you feel about his weight? Like, do you think he's someone because he's listed as 6 foot 220? Do you think he has to get to like the 230 range to be able to really play confidently in the NFL? Because I just am he played the star role at Pitt, which is like basically your hybrid space player of old, sort of idea as the combo linebacker, combo safety sort of thing.
I would say no because I don't think that I if you put it's okay, let me it depends what you want to do with him. If you want him to be a true weak side linebacker, then yeah, he's probably got to get up to like 230, 235. But if you just want him to be more of like a specialist, then I'm fine with him where he is. And in that case, then Rodriguez is going to get a decent amount of run as the early down linebacker, and you treat Lewis as a pure third down backer slash like again, you kind of make a role for him. My thing is we talked about earlier. We talked about all offseason. We want the Lions to get faster on defense and get guys who can make plays. Lewis isn't necessarily a linebacker, isn't necessarily a nickel, isn't necessarily a safety. He is a defensive X factor. And you just got to get like I love the idea of getting versatile pieces like that in the building.
Yeah, I mean it's kind of you don't see it as much in the NFL, but definitely at the college level, you get a lot of these guys that come out of high school and they're just listed as athletes on the recruiting sites, and then they come in and the coaches are like, well, he could be wide receiver, could be a safety, could be and then they kind of figure it out over time how they want to use him. And Lewis just kind of reminds me of that in terms of like this guy is a football player, and we will figure out what we want to do with him.
And what do the Lions always say? We just want football players. We don't care about positions. We just want weapons. That's a
Sure.
defensive weapon.
And I think a couple other names in technically linebacker category, like you've got Jake Golday from Cincy, who was playing as a Sam in a 3-3-5 stack defense, and then previously at Central Arkansas in the FCS, he was an edge and a Mike. So like a lot of different roles there, and a guy that's comfortable in space. He's got the big size at 6'4", 239, but really good speed, like just really athletic for his frame. He's an interesting name to me. And then similarly in the sort of hybrid role is another Michigan name in Jay Sean Barham, who played mostly linebacker in college, but has also the thought is that he's probably more of an edge in the NFL, but he hasn't really been developed as an edge. And so that if you're looking for like I think you could keep him as a pass rushing will, or you could just make him a full-time edge. He's 92nd on the composite big board. He's an interesting name, I feel like. Pretty durable player too. Again, hasn't really been coached. So I think you have to take a linebacker in this draft. That's my opinion. What you want that to look like, I think, is up for debate.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mentioned Harold Perkins earlier is kind of like a Sam
Sure.
kind of hybrid that can drop into coverage, but also can give you speed off the edge if you want. There are a number of ways you can go with some of the versatile pieces. Like when you look at like the offensive guys you could get later in the draft, like a running back or a receiver or a tight end, like there are a lot of guys that it's like, okay, these are depth pieces, obviously, because the offense is pretty set. But on defense, it's like, no, you could get like primary backups that see the field like 30% of snaps a game, like legitimately down here. And at safety too, like the Lions have so many DBs. Cool. They're all signed for like 1 year. So you can get guys that are going to give you a little bit more versatility. I also would be remiss if I didn't mention, because of my last name, VJ Payne, as another one of those like versatile safeties. But there are some other, like plenty of guys that I want guys at that point of the draft, like third, fourth, fifth round, that can do multiple jobs and just figure it out. Let Kelvin Shepherd
Sure.
be creative.
Yeah. I mean, I also think in terms of a late round strategy that at most of these positions, I was flagging a few late round names, and I'm just really in favor in general of taking Indiana players with late round picks because a lot of these guys are not the most athletic, so they're not going super high on these big boards, but they're the best coached, smartest players out there. Like that Indiana team is just immaculately coached. They know what to do, fundamentals, and like I don't know, man. When you get to the fifth, sixth round, when there are these guys that have that background, the winning background, and just the football IQ background, I would love taking some of them. So whether that's Mikhail Kamara at edge or someone like an Aiden Fisher at linebacker, like just one Indiana pick late in the draft. That I would appreciate that.
I've heard a few people talking up Fisher too, and it's like, yeah, like it makes sense. Like I can see why
Yeah, and
people
I
would
mean
want that.
D'Angelo Pons we didn't mention as a DB in that second, third round range. There's going to be a ton of Indiana guys that go in this draft, and I think it would be wise to pick up one of them. Just my opinion. Other positions, I feel like we should talk a little bit about running backs a possibility. with David Montgomery out the door. It's a weird running back class, though, because you've got Jeremiah Love, who might go as high as any running back has gone since Saquon.
They've been talking about him going third to the Cardinals. I'm like, the Cardinals have like five running backs already signed. What are we doing here? But if that happens, the Lions should immediately be calling about Trey Benson.
Yeah, yeah. So running back is a possibility, but then after Jeremiah Love on the consensus big board, there wasn't another name for like 70 slots,
Yeah.
and it's like a just the ultimate top heavy running back class. The one name I do like a little bit later in the draft, Katron Allen from Penn State. He was at 112 on the consensus big board, which I feel like that's around the point where running back can enter the conversation for the Lions. Should not be taking one in the first, second, or third round, but taking one
Jeremiah
after that.
Love. Trade up for Love. We want weapons on this offense.
Yeah. But Katron Allen, just as like when I was trying to find guys that fit the mold of what you want as the complement to Gibbs, and Katron Allen's got that big, powerful runner, yards after contact, third down rusher, goal line rusher, all that kind of stuff. Moves the pile, falls forward, physical as a pass protector and blitz pickups. Like that one just makes sense to me as a guy. And but there are a number of running back names later in the draft, whether it's Roman Hemby or Noah Whittington or Jam Miller. Like there were a lot of names in the fifth, sixth, seventh round that could make some sense to me. Tight end is another position. We don't know what's going on with Sam Laporta's back.
Yeah, uh, in terms of getting insurance, I don't care about your blocking ability. Give me a day three tight end that can catch and like be a Shane Zylstra type of molds. For as much as you just need a guy that can catch a pass every now and again. And so give me a guy on day three that can fill that role. I don't need a blocker. We have that. Give me some
Yeah,
versatility.
there aren't a lot of like high end tight end names in this draft. I think Eli Stowers was one of the top names on the board, and he's like late second. Too early for me with the tight end there. Max Clare's 68th. I don't know. He's fine. Oscar Delp is a name I've seen at 108 from Georgia. That's his spot on the consensus big board. He was a top recruit. I'm not huge on Oscar Delp. He just never really developed into a super productive player at Georgia. But Georgia tight end, I guess, if you think that's the thing, then maybe you think about it. The athleticism's there; it just hasn't really come to fruition. Further down, Marlon Klein is a Michigan guy. Always was like a big athlete, but another one where the production never really matched some of the traits. Nate Borkircher is another name I've seen a little bit further down. It's not a great tight end class to me, so that limits it a little bit. But maybe you should take one anyway.
Yeah, it's worth considering. A another wide receiver might be worth considering because the Lions have their top four at like around seven, like kind of guy.
Sure.
Like in terms, I'm not talking like in the top 150. Like I'm talking like day three just to get another body in the building because like you have your top four with Amon-Ra, Jamo, Tesla, and Dortch. After that, like you could maybe use a wide receiver five unless you're a big Tom Kennedy guy still. Uh, getting a guy with some size that can maybe be a backup X because right now it's kind of Tesla and that's it. Um, wouldn't mind getting a nose tackle on day three either, just to kind of back up Tyleek now that Lopez is gone as well because he was a good rotational piece. We should also mention, speaking of defensive tackles, we have not heard much about the Lions' top 30 visits. One of the names we did hear was Caleb Banks, who injured health concerns, but that is worth mentioning in terms of like someone like around that 50 range or like early second round trade up kind of guy where has the athletic traits and the Lions might be inclined to get another pass rushing kind of guy there.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was reading the article the other day about it was in the Athletic. It was about like just takes on this draft from various scouts and like what the consensus is, and they were like, "This is the worst defensive tackle class we've ever seen. Like these guys are terrible." So maybe that speaks to subpar depth. I know that Caden McDonald from Ohio State's like the only guy I've seen high, and then it's more of just picking later on. Two names that are actually interesting to me later in the draft: Grayson Halton from Oklahoma. is a guy that I have seen some people talk about as a Lions potential pick. 6'3", 293, guy with pass rush juice. Like if you are not feeling like Levi Onwuzurike is going to be a big contributor, which I feel like should be everyone at this point, and you're not sure about Mekhi Wingo, then like Halton definitely is another name to add to that pot of names. I would be fine with him. And then the other one that's really interesting to me is Dante Corleone from Cincinnati, nicknamed the Godfather. Um, he's an interesting case because he had blood clots in his lungs in June 2024, and there's been some fear about that with how it pertains to his NFL career and that kind of thing. But I feel like there's a certain point in the draft where you just have to take him because he was a monster at Cincinnati. Like that dude is a behemoth and just is a great football player. Gets after the quarterback, stuffs the run. Like I think he's a first round talent if he didn't have some of the issues that have popped up with him health wise. But um, again, at a certain point, you have to gamble on it. Like once you get to fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh rounds, it's slim pickings anyway. So might as well take an upside play.
Yeah, and honestly, that's what the day three picks are for. Like you're either getting depth that's you're not that has a floor that of a backup that's not going to start, or you're taking a swing. You got to mix in both because you obviously got to have good depth. But sure, take a swing. Why not? What do you have to lose with a sixth round pick, right? Like, might as well. With that said, that like we've kind of touched on a lot here. Is there any kind of last thoughts you have going into the draft before we wrap?
No, I mean I do think that this is a draft where probably quality prevails over quantity in terms of the picks you make. Like I'm not against taking a lot of picks and fortifying things, but they spent a lot of the free agency period building depth and fortifying things. So more than anything else, it's what you do at edge and at tackle. Like those are the two big ones. And so if you need to do trade ups to solidify that, then that's probably better than sitting back and taking a bunch of day three picks. Like not the day three picks are meaningless, but for where this team is now in the contention window they're in, it's probably more valuable to get a guy who can really play right away and can make that big impact. And if you hit those first two picks, at a good clip, I don't think people will care as much about what you do later in the draft. Like those are everything, and this is the moment of the off season. Everyone spent free agency period complaining and whining about the Lions, transactions, but this was always going to be the big kahuna, shall we say, of the off season. This is where it's made or broken, and I think Holmes had a fairly solid draft last year. I know that none of his guys like blew anyone out of the water as a rookie, but he was picking later in the draft for one. And number two, I think he got probably three players that could be starters in their NFL careers as time goes by. So I think that's a decent enough job, and now he just needs to do it again.
Yeah. So there you have it, folks. That is it for our draft preview. We'll check in at some point next week after the draft to recap what the Lions do. But that's going to be it for this episode. So if you've made it this far, be sure to leave us a review or leave us a like and subscribe if you're on YouTube. Follow the show at Payne and Drain on Twitter. You can find me at ZachPayne41, Alex at Alex_Drain. And that is going to be it. So until next time, my friends, enjoy the draft. Cheers, everyone.